May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
In the area of our basement at home where I usually work out, I have a poster that I got a long time ago of the Disney villains. And you've got the Wicked Witch and the Wicked Stepmother. You've got Ursula the Sea Witch with her nasty eels, Flotsam and Jetsam in there. We've got Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, and I love that poster. And of course, for every villain in a Disney story, there's also a hero. And the stories set us up to boo for the villains, cheer for the heroes, and of course, cheer when the heroes eventually vanquish those villains, because in the world of Disney, good always has to win out over evil. That's just the way it goes. Except we all know that the real world doesn't work that way, and that things rarely fall neatly into categories of the heroes and the villains, and that villains can be redeemed, and that heroes sometimes fall. And it was no different that night at the Passover for Jesus and his disciples. Now, thanks to Mr. Da Vinci, we all thought that there was only the 12 disciples and they all sat on one side of the table and they were all looking, straight out. And I don't think that's what it looked like. Of course, people were gathered around the table, and we hear that the beloved disciple was resting his head on Jesus' chest. And the 12 were not the only ones there. Jesus' family may have been there, women who had been walking with him, other disciples, children under feet. This was a celebration. This was a festival. This was the Passover. This was the time when people gathered to be together and share and eat and celebrate the community that they formed together. And if we think about who we knew was there, we've got Peter. God love Peter. Peter, the rock on whom I will build my church, that Jesus has already said, "Get behind me, Satan," once. Peter, who wanted to build the 3 booths up on top of the mountain for the transfiguration. Peter, who is in a few short hours about to deny Jesus 3 times. Peter, who was eventually crucified. We have James and John, the inner circle. But if you'll remember one of those stories back there in the gospel, Jesus, what are you all arguing about? Well, what were they arguing about? Who was going to be greater? Jesus, we want to know who's going to sit at your right hand and at your left. And Jesus says, that's not mine to decide. So even the beloved disciple, the one who was resting his head on Jesus' chest, wanted to make sure that his place was secure, that he was going to be there forever, and whatever happened next, he was sure that he had a ticket to heaven. We're not told that Thomas was there, and we don't hear much about Thomas, except every single year in the first Sunday after Easter, poor Thomas. Every single year. Nobody else gets that much attention in the lectionary except for Thomas. Thomas wasn't a bad guy. He was just nervous. He was just anxious. If he had a Myers-Briggs type, he was an S. He wanted to see it and touch it and know it deep in his heart. Judas Iscariot. Now, in the Disney version of this night, we have Jesus on one side and we have Judas on the other. But in reality, Judas was not the villain of the story. He's set up that way, but he really wasn't. He had faithfully followed Jesus for 3 years. I think he was a guy that was just really anxious about what was happening. He could tell, he knew things were going south fast. And he was just really anxious. One scholar even wrote that the reason why Judas betrayed Jesus is because he thought that if Jesus could just get in front of the Pharisees, and if the Pharisees would just listen to Jesus, they would realize their error, that Jesus was the Messiah, and that this was Judas's best way to get Jesus that audience. John tells us that the devil put it into Judas's heart. Maybe yes, maybe no. People are complicated, and our motivations change. And no matter what the motivations, no matter where those folks fell on the scale between the hero and the villain, and they all fell somewhere in between. And if we're honest with ourselves, we all fall somewhere in between. We may have hero days, we may have villain days, but for the most part, we're going most of the time kind of fall right there in the middle. But they all gathered together to be together, to eat, to celebrate. Those who are outcast, those who are unknown to anyone else, those whose names are not mentioned, those who just work tough jobs 6 days a week, those whose kids were at home crying and they were so glad not to be with those crying kids at home. They had gathered and drawn to be together on that holy night because what they knew was that God was there among them, at that table, in that community. And that is true for us. We gather here tonight at the beginning of our Easter Triduum, the great story of salvation. And we are invited in the same way the disciples were invited, to be together, to pray, to eat. Some of you may get your feet washed. Some of you have already told me, I never get my feet washed. But we're here together in the same way, drawn by our love of God and God's love for us, to be reminded again in a really palpable way of the blessedness of being God's people, the blessedness of being together, the blessedness of coming in times when we are uncertain, when we're broken, when we're not quite sure what's going to happen tomorrow. And yet we are still invited and drawn and fed and cared for in the same way Jesus cared for his disciples that night, reminding them of the blessedness of the sharing of the meal and that gift of community. Amen.